Coming up in this episode.
When we had to pivot, yes, it was a little bit painful to pivot away from that idea. This is how I reconcile it for myself. It's what's the job of an inventor? Is to solve a problem. There's an existing problem, use technology to solve it and make life easier. And once you succeed doing that, that's the fulfillment an inventor gets.
What you said was that the universe is quote unquote chaos. Whereas I believe the universe to be wonderfully designed. And actually, that's spoken about in scripture. It's very much emphasized in the Quran.
And by the way, my main takeaway from that is just that God doesn't do co-founders, by the sounds of it. Just to tie it back into
the beginning. Do you know when you're doing a highlight reel?
Yeah. I'll put that. Okay, this will be the guy in the beginning.
Okay. The Founders Unplugged podcast, hosted by Greg McCallum. Raw, unedited conversations with entrepreneurs and startup founders.
Hello, Abbas. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, good to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a while. A lot's happened since we last spoke. It's been a crazy few weeks.
Yes, I'm sure, and I'm keen to get stuck in and hear all about it. I'm loving your background, by the way. You've got a lot going on there.
Thank you. Yeah. This is like my office at home. This is where I get most of my masterminding work done. My evil schemes.
Your evil schemes. Yeah. Hi, Rami. How are you?
Greg, hi. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. We were just making small talk, waiting for you to show up. But it's great to meet you. Abbas has told me a lot about you. So we've obviously not met yet, but I feel like I know you already.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. So look, thank you so much for jumping on. As you probably noticed, we're already recording. We like to get straight into it. I like to just get straight stuck in. And as I'm sure Abbas already mentioned to you, like this is pretty laid back. We're just having a conversation, just going to learn a bit more about you guys and hear a bit more about your story. You know, Abbas already mentioned that a lot's happened in the last couple of weeks and since we last spoke. So I'd be keen to hear about all of that. But I suppose, do have one small amount of semblance of structure to this entire thing, which is at the beginning. I think it's very useful for those listening and watching to get a sense of who you are and a bit about the business. So perhaps if you wouldn't mind taking turns introducing yourselves and then telling the world a bit more about YouMakr.
Could I introduce Rami?
Go for it. It's up to you guys.
Right.
Introduce each other.
Yeah. No, I'll do Rami because he's so unbelievably humble. He'll just say, yeah, I'm a guy, I do this thing. And then
Okay, right.
It's better if I do. Okay, so by way of introduction, my name is Abbas. I'm a chartered accountant by training, and I currently head the sales function at YouMakr. That's my life, and that's my role. This guy, what can I tell you about this guy? He's pretty exceptional. His name is Rami Akily, born in Iraq. Unfortunately, he had to leave during the war, got asylum in Sweden, learned Swedish, decided to become a physicist, as you do, and an inventor, again, as you do. At the tender age of, I think, 20, he designed and patented a new way of harnessing battery technology. He really puts me to shame, actually. I feel quite stupid around him. Started an electric bicycle company and then decided, you know what, I'm going to do AI. And here we are with YouMakr, and what a journey it's been.
How do you feel about that introduction?
I didn't pay Abbas to say this, I can assure you. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Did it go as scripted? Yeah. Did it go as planned?
We'll take it.
Yeah. And also, apologies, I was pronouncing your name wrong. I was calling you Abbas. It's Abbas, right?
I have so many different variations of my name. It's Abs and Abzi and some of my friends.
What do you prefer?
Abbas. Abbas is fine.
Okay. All right. Cool. Abbas. Good introduction. And I don't know who wants to take the lead on this one, but why not? Who would like to tell the audience a bit more about YouMakr and what it is and where the idea came from?
Well, I think Rami's probably best bet to handle this question.
How far back do you want to go? Because it's been a long journey.
We've got time, so as far back as you want to. Yeah, of course.
So the story of YouMakr started off as something completely different from what it is now. Initially, the whole idea, and this is the thing that Abbas and I, we came around to build, was supposed to be a marketplace where inventors can connect with expert engineers to prototype items. And this was around the time 3D printing was becoming more prominent, and we thought this is an incredible market event because 3D printing makes prototyping a lot easier and more cost efficient. And so it was just an obvious thing that we should build a platform around 3D printing and let people prototype their homemade inventions. Long story short, what ended up happening is we didn't end up attracting inventors. What we ended up attracting was final year engineering students who were looking to prototype their final year's project. And that became our customers. So we kind of we got sucked into edtech without really meaning to do so. But the one thing that came out of that interaction with students is they wanted help with writing their project report. So say, well, it's great, you've helped us build this prototype, but now we need to build a report around it. Can you help us with that too? And we're like, well, how are we going to do that? Are we going to bring in, academic writers onto the platform and is it even ethical to write it on behalf of the student? So that's what led me to start thinking about, well, can AI in particular help a student draft a report? And that's what led us into large language models, machine learning, and I started to experiment with this. And you know what? It looked like it was possible. And this was way before the generative AI that we have today, ChatGPT and all that stuff. We started doing all that even before ChatGPT came out.
Before it was cool.
Before it was cool. Yeah, before it was known that, software can do this.
Yeah.
So we launched our first MVP, and that was a product that helps students generate essays and project reports and kind of helps the student co-write their piece 10 times faster than they would have done manually. So we launched that product, and we were absolutely gobsmacked by the traction that we got. I mean, it was so much more successful than the Inventions platform that I just can't tell you. Within a few months, we reached 100,000 users without spending any money on marketing. It was literally just students using it once. They get blown away by it, and they share it with 30 other students.
Yeah,
so
has virality to it.
Yeah, exactly. It's we really hit a chord with students when we launched that product, and that's when we thought, you know what, this is something here. We need to double down on this. So we kind of abandoned the invention idea, and we focused 100% on this because we could see such a clear product market fit. So now with that kind of growth, Greg, that actually put us on a trajectory to become $1 billion company. We were heading somewhere, and we were heading fast.
Yeah.
Until ChatGPT dropped. And that really rug pulled us. We were going so fast, we were becoming so successful, and at the same rate, we were starting to decline immediately the moment ChatGPT came out, because obviously it could do similar things, and it was free. That was the main point. So there was no way for us to compete on that use case. And that kind of forced us into our new product, which we're working on now. And that's what's creating all the buzz that you hear about in the media currently. It's basically, we managed to take what we've learned through our experience with AI and create a model that can predict your upcoming exam questions. And so if you're studying for your GCSEs or A-levels or whatever, university test or whatever it is, by giving us some information about that exam, we can predict with a level of accuracy what's likely to come up. And once we do so, we can create practice questions that are similar to what's about to come up so that you can practice ahead of time.
Yeah.
And that's essentially the idea. Now, this is another blockbuster idea, is what we feel, because the reception from the students has been amazing, from investors has been amazing, and it's the one thing that ChatGPT cannot do this time.
Yeah.
So we thought, okay, well,
yes. I suppose you're playing a game. It's like, well,
yeah, possibly.
have something ready for next year, just in case.
I guess that's the position we're in. We constantly have to innovate, to keep going. And in hindsight, even though it was disheartening when our growth was kind of like snapped out of us by ChatGPT, it was a really terrible time back then. But in hindsight, we see it as a blessing in disguise because it really forced us to innovate. And now we've come up with a use case that is far more innovative than anything we've done before, frankly. So that's the story, and here we are.
Yeah, and you're right about that innovation. I think that's a very important way to look at in any business, right? And judging by both of your backgrounds, you'd be pretty used to taking that approach for the large parts of your career. So it's a very important thing to look at, especially in the area of AI, which is a very fast-paced, fast-moving ecosystem. I suppose if you were to snooze and lay down on that one, you could get zoomed by competitors pretty damn quickly, right?
I think in terms of like my background, I used to work at Deutsche Bank, and Deutsche Bank was 100,000 people, and instigating any form of new change, it was very, very, very difficult. And I think that's the case with most large organizations. In order to go as quickly as we have, you need to be a startup. You need to be extremely nimble. And I think further to your question, I think in the early stages of the business, especially abandoning inventions and then moving towards AI, that took a lot of, I would say it actually took a lot of courage. We'd invested so much time and our effort and our energy into building that, and it just wasn't successful. And I think that was the first iteration of not just the business, but of ourselves, that abandon the idea, but don't abandon the business. Go through the process of iteration, go to the user, ask them for feedback, try to solve their problems, test what you're offering them, and then just continue going through that iterative cycle. We've done that now so many times. We've run so many experiments that we're now, battle hardened, I think. The emotional roller coaster of the startup now, for Rami and I mean, we're not as temperamental or as emotional as we once were.
But it's interesting because that's something that is a really important soft skill, I guess you could say, and hard skill, practical skill for most startup founders to have, but very, very difficult to achieve that level of self-awareness, and even to position yourself as a company whereby you can get that data for it to be actionable in the first place is very difficult. You were quite fortunate in that you were given an abundance of it by these tens, if not hundreds of thousands of users. But even then, I can imagine it must have been quite a painful decision, like you said, for the emotional attachment, maybe more than anything else, and in what your idea was previously, to then let that go.
Yeah, I think that's one of the dangers of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs get too attached.
You can be married to your ideas, right?
And you're just unwilling to give it up. You keep on fighting and fighting and fighting. And I think that's imperative. You need to have a level of endeavor as an entrepreneur to keep going in the face of criticism or negative feedback. You need to push through those walls and maintain a level of enthusiasm. Simultaneously, it's also important to look at the reality of the business, the market, its defensibility, and the future of the business and the idea, and marry these. And I think a lot of founders, struggle to find that balance between maintaining enthusiasm and then being, candid enough to say, look, the idea isn't working and we might need to try something else. It's a very, very difficult balance to achieve. And those who know me will tell you that I'm quite an emotional guy, but Rami, thankfully, this guy's got temperament like a freaking, I don't know what is the metaphor. This guy is just ice cold. There's the fighter pilot in Top Gun. His name is Iceman. Right. That's Rami. Rami's just chilled out all the time, and so he makes the journey much, much easier for the.
Maybe on the outside, if I know people, I know people like that quite well. I can sometimes put that facade on. So for the outside, everyone thinks, oh, yeah, that guy's cool. He's calm. He's collected. Always makes the right decision. On the inside, it's just like a screaming gerbil, just constantly, like, you know.
he is Arab, so there is something inside of him that's just
right. It's just hidden. Yeah, repressed rage, just ready to burst at any moment. Yeah, but no, it's interesting. I mean, there's that famous saying, isn't there, which I'll probably butcher now, which is, as a founder, you should have a strongly held set of loosely held beliefs. Which, yeah, I think I've completely paraphrased that, but it's very important. But at what point is it, that the business, because did it go to a direction that you were fortunately also interested in solving the problems of those individuals? Had it gone to another direction, do you think you would have abandoned it entirely? Because it is quite removed from serving inventors to then serving students. So do you feel quite fortunate that it was still in the same space that you still had enough interest in to continue pursuing?
I think I'll answer that from my perspective, and I think Rami's got a different perspective to mine. So, like, I went to state school, throughout my life. And when I hit my postgrad, as a chartered accountant, I then went to I read venture finance for another postgrad, and basically the differences between private and state then became very apparent to me. And I was very blessed in my life, and that some good people came into my life and really uplifted me. I stand on the shoulders of others, but I'm cognizant of the fact that there are many millions of students, not just in Europe, but globally, who get left behind academically. That's something that I'm quite passionate about. It's a problem I would like to remedy, even if it is by a small extent. And I think Rami's experience, and he can talk about that, lends to solving that problem on a wider basis. And so we are inherently, instinctively, I think, accustomed to the problem, and we've lived to some extent that problem. But if say, for example, post inventions, it had gone into a completely different area, like, I don't know, horticulture, I can't tell you I'll be as excited about it. I don't think there'd be much VC interest in that space as well. So yeah, we just happen to fall into an area where, for me personally, there's a level of excitement and a level of endeavor, but also it just happens to be one of the, if not the hottest investment areas for a long time.
Yeah, what's your take on that, Rami? Do you feel like you're fortunate that it happened to, in some ways, turn out that this tool was useful for an area that just so happened to be one that you could find yourself to be passionate about as just as much, if not more so, than the previous idea?
Yeah, I guess we're fortunate enough that we took the AI direction long before it was a thing. And that gave us a head start to learning the technology, learning the ins and outs of it, because generative AI is new, and there aren't many engineers in the world who have really understood fully how it works and how to push it to the limits. And we had kind of like 2 years of a head start doing exactly that. I knew large language models was going to be successful and it was going to change the world. I just didn't know it was going to be that fast.
Right.
So I was excited about the technology to begin with. Now, in terms of the dynamics of a pivot, I actually really liked our original idea, the inventions idea, because being an inventor myself, it just like I felt at home, us serving other inventors and making their lives easier. I could understand their problems, having invented an electric bike and built a company around it before. So I understand the journey and the challenges, and I had a lot to say about those problems. Now, when we had to pivot, yes, it was a little bit painful to pivot away from that idea. But when I think about it, this is how I reconcile it for myself. It's what's the job of an inventor? Is to solve a problem. There's an existing problem, use technology to solve it and make life easier. And once you succeed doing that, that's the fulfillment an inventor gets. So yes, maybe the platform idea serving inventors didn't pan out, but the fact that we invented an AI product that can solve a problem, like an academic problem for billions. There are like 1.8 billion students in the world. This could potentially solve it for. You learn to love it. You learn to love the possibilities, the impact that you're about to make in the world. You suddenly become excited about it.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think it's what's really interesting. My takeaway from that as well is the fact that you referred to yourself as an inventor as well, which I think is an interesting. I mean, obviously you have a history of being an inventor, very literally, but even in the context of you as a founder of a software business, I mean, that's something that is often overlooked, which is that software founders are inventors. Maybe not of physical creations, but of digital ones. And actually, there's a lot to that, actually, that I never really considered until just now. That there is a sort of a social responsibility. There's almost an ethical responsibility, and almost a liberating sense of like you can invent something, and much like art, once you put it out there into the world, it'll be interpreted or used in ways that maybe you hadn't considered before. It can in some ways stop being your baby and it starts being other people's. And I'd not really started thinking about that until you'd referred to yourself as an inventor, and just now and now I'm starting to make that connection in some ways, which is interesting. And you have to listen to what people are saying in response to your product. I mean, we all know that it's very important to iterate with feedback in mind, and that's a pretty standard go-to-market approach these days. Get your product validated and get feedback and improve it and so on. But actually, there's a lot of links between those, the world of art, the world of culture, and the world of invention there, isn't there, that we could probably learn from?
Yeah, like back when we were in the process of pivoting, so at first glance, this is how it looked like for me. Which is more impactful, helping someone build a hardware item, inventing it and pushing it to the market, or helping someone write an essay? The invention thing sounded far more intricate. It sounded far like we're solving a bigger problem. But actually, when you look at the bigger picture, it's not. It's actually, if you can take a problem that billions of people are experiencing and you make their lives easier, that's actually a much bigger problem to solve.
Well, yeah, there's more people in education than there are who are inventors. So yep, you're absolutely solving a bigger problem. And I suppose also you're directly, potentially, increasing the chances of there being more inventors in the world just by doing that as well. So you're still in some way solving the same problem. Yeah, so that's good. Do you think you'd ever revisit that initial idea at some point in the future?
So, dare I say that I still think it has legs, but it requires so much more resources. It requires, and there are a number of things that we learned about the inventor demographic in general. We learned that they are so paranoid by nature. Like, for example, if you want to help them prototype their idea, they just simply wouldn't share their idea with you, even if you offer them a way to help building it, because they're so paranoid that they're going to steal their idea and run with it. And so it's a very hard demographic to serve and work with. And also it's a hard demographic to target. Like, for example, with students, we go to universities, we go to schools, and we have people that we can talk to and sign on. But how do you find inventors?
Especially if they don't want to talk about what they're doing, right? Then there's no trace really of them online and so on. Yeah.
So I think theoretically speaking, the structure that we had invented is beautiful, and theoretically it can work, but in practice it requires so much to get it moving, and that's why I think we're in a much better position now.
Well, maybe when you go public with this company and then you sell, you have an exit, and you've got some money in the bank, then you could revisit it. In a couple of years, basically, is what I'm saying. Not long. by the sound of things. Yeah, exactly. So that's great. So this is a new direction, and sort of what stage is it all at now? How has this new direction been going so far, with the element of sort of the predicting of the exam questions and so on? Where is that all currently as things stand?
So ChatGPT came out in December. And we actually had a lead when ChatGPT came out, because generative AI is actually exponentially more expensive the more you use it.
Right.
And Rami managed to crack the algorithm back then, which allowed us to reduce the cost of AI by a factor of 10. So even when ChatGPT came out, it was on our radar, but it wasn't a massive concern. But then they went free, and that really slapped us in the face. And we've been at the drawing board pretty much since January. Like, what exactly is the continued version of YouMakr? And then that took us to going back to students and asking them what problems they face and, how can we help them? And the overwhelming feedback that we were getting, Greg, was that, look, I really struggle with exams. And I just want to help me to get through them. I don't care how you do it. I don't care what the website looks like. I don't care what color it is. Help me get through the exams.
And when they said, help me get through the exams, what you took from that was sort of translation, help me feel more prepared for them, essentially.
Yeah, I think Rami has worded this really well. I think there's a saying by, I think it's Henry Ford, when he was designing the Ford Model T. He said, if I asked my customers, what they wanted, they would have just said a faster horse.
Yeah.
And you have to think of an idea which is intuitive, which is original, which is mind-blowing. And you
have to interpret.
Exactly. And what we took from the feedback was that, look, I've struggled with my exams, maybe because I'm anxious, or I struggle with my exams because I run out of time. I struggle with my exams because I revised the wrong thing. And all of that then got Rami's, massive mind kind of churning. And he's like, well, let me think, what can we do? And so that led us to the product, I think around February time, that, okay, maybe there's something here, February, March time, like maybe there's something here. So for 6 months, effectively, we've been building this latest product. And it basically allows for a student to upload their course materials, and they can, with a degree of certainty, get a level of insight into what's going to come up in their exams. And anecdotally, what we're finding in terms of the empirical evidence is students are more confident, students are more efficient, they waste less time. The remediation of subject matter is much quicker. So if they are struggling in, say, GCSE maths on quadratic equations, hypothetically, the time it takes for them to sort that problem out in their head and understand it is much quicker through YouMakr. Obviously, there's a lot more testing to do, but ultimately what we're finding is that there are many students who are going to benefit and uplift their grades as a consequence of using YouMakr. And that's where the product is. I mean, it's, I would say, beta, kind of MVP stage, right?
Yeah.
Is that a good way of describing it?
Yeah, we're working on the MVP.
Yeah.
So like is it a closed beta currently, or can anyone participate?
You can register for early access, and you may be selected to, come in and try it out and give us some feedback, and we'll work with you to kind of we've already started doing it with some students, and the feedback has been overwhelming. There's the reason for this is actually there's a lot of research around this area that basically determine that there is a difference between recognition and recall. So when you're studying something, you are reading a chapter and you're reading the information there, and you go like, oh yeah, I recognize this. I recognize this because the teacher talked about it. I recognize it because I've studied it before. And so when you see it again, you simply recognize it. Now that recognition can play tricks on your mind because it gives you a false sense of security that you know the subject. But then when you sit in the exam, you're trying to recall it, but you can't recall it as well. And so the optimum way of studying isn't necessarily to look at something and acknowledge to yourself that you recognize the subject, but to actually close the book, be asked questions by someone and see if you can recall that information without looking at any prompts or any clues. And that is like recalling information requires practice. So you need to have questions, answering them, someone asking you and answering them. And so when I talk to successful students I ask them about their revision process, and they consistently say we take the question, well, we take the material, we create questions out of them, like flashcards for ourselves, and we let someone ask us, quiz us.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And I thought to myself, well, so how many flashcards do you create, to prepare for an exam? Some of them came back saying like 150 flashcards. And that takes them days to write questions and answers on the backside of flashcard. And they're putting so much effort into creating these questions, and they're sharing it with their friends to quiz each other. And I'm thinking, you're spending days on this work when I can generate it for you in a matter of minutes.
And I think the important point to highlight is that this is one of the material dichotomies that exists between state school and private school. That private school spends a lot more time preparing the student for exactly what Rami said.
Right.
And so they are much more accustomed, they are much more inclined to enter the exam hall with a sense of confidence and preparedness. Whereas in state school, it's not as much. And God willing, YouMakr should be able to bridge that gap. And with the school's interest that we've seen of late, we think we're on an upward footing. We're onto something here, God willing.
So that's interesting. There's a couple of things you guys have said there that's super interesting. Like the first is, I don't know which one to attack first, but I suppose that the system that the students are using there, while quite impressive, is somewhat flawed to an extent as well. Not only because of the time, issue there, but also because you can only really devise questions around subjects in which you know to ask questions about, right? So there's almost probably a natural bias built into that they're going to be asking themselves questions around topics that they are more inclined to be comfortable with answering.
Yeah.
Because you can't think of the question for something that you don't know the answer to, right? It's a chicken and egg thing. You're asking for people to think of asking something that may not come up, so that there's that, which I suppose your platform's going to be able to do in spades. And maybe, if you were to ask someone to sit down and write a list of 100 questions and then you give them yours, they might go, wow, I have never thought to ask that one. You probably get that a lot.
Yeah.
So there's that side of things. But then also you mentioned about the public and private school differences. That's super interesting too, because I never really thought about it so much. I mean, I was publicly schooled, so I don't know what the experience, despite my accent, I was publicly schooled. And I suppose that the responsibility for preparedness is on the student, right? In public schools, the vast majority of the time. I'd just assumed that was the same in private school.
I think the onus, I think, is always on the student.
Of course.
But the amount of assistance and, dare I say it, hand-holding is slightly greater in a private school setting. And that's a combination of variables. Why is that the case? Classroom sizes are materially smaller in private school. There is a greater awareness of exam data from a school's perspective, even more so with private schools. Why? Because they're competing against each other for fees and for parents' attention, and they weigh
money
as the leader. And so they're like, listen, if we've got a problem with one student on their exams, this is going to be detrimental to the school in general. And so they really make sure that they're on top of it, whereas the consequences from a state school aren't as abrupt. So that's I think
they still get their funding. They still have a long list of students that need to attend their school. It's not the repercussions aren't as major if they don't have a higher pass rate as compared to in the private sector.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's these are important points to bear in mind. The second is that once the student has taken what our AI has given them in areas where they are weak and strong, if they struggle on a particular area, this then takes them into our AI tutor. And then, God willing, they will be targeted with help on the areas where they are weak. And
if you are enjoying this episode, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments.
That's interesting. So not only will they be given essentially a mock exam,
but
then from that, they could either retake that mock exam, I assume, as many times as they like, or various iterations of that.
Yeah.
But also, based on the answers, it will advise them on what to focus on to get better.
Exactly. There's no point teaching a student something that they already know and where they already have a level of insight and understanding. The key to this is uplifting them in areas where they struggle or where they have uncertainty, and that's what YouMakr at its core does, and does extremely quickly and does so extremely efficiently. And that is overwhelmingly in the students' best interests, in the parents' best interests, but also in the school's best interests. I think in the globalized world in which we live, especially, I remember doing my postgrad, I was competing against, students coming over from China. And, they used to walk into the exam hall with like suitcases, and in this increasingly globalized world, the students are not competing now against other students just in their immediate locality. It's now much more globalized, and as I say, we can uplift millions, God willing, with this.
And you mentioned there, the benefit to the actual schools and institutions. How do they feel about this? Have you talked to them?
I think the provisional feedback was this: when we were building it in Q1 of this year, they were reticent to a technology that could potentially replace a teacher. And that feedback was very strong, and it was across the board: private school, public school, state school, academies, tuition colleges, even people where there was an element of homeschooling. They were like, look, we don't want to replace the person who's actually giving the teaching. And so we very much took that on board with regards to the design. But they were very much forthcoming and excited about the prospect of an AI tool that could make their lives easier, that could reduce the administration, that can give much more targeted teaching, and to uplift the students in a much quicker way. And so the feedback was, look, don't take away our jobs, but help us do our jobs better. And I think what YouMakr is.
So are there conversations with some educational institutions to maybe work in conjunction with them to have this tool be made readily available to their students and so on? Or are you going that route, or is it more from the bottom up, from the end user up, or maybe a mixture of both? What's the approach there?
Yeah, so I think as Rami builds the product, as head of sales, that's basically my job to figure out what is the best sales channel to approach and to target. And much like Rami's doing with regards to endless experimentation of the product, constant iteration, constant feedback from users, I'm doing the same thing on my side, just relating to customers. What do you need? What can we help you with? How can we solve it? What is your price point? And then once we've done that experiment hundreds of times, we'll have made the determination as to what the best approach will be. What I can tell you is that we're not going to go and cast our nets, very wide. I think we're going to go inch wide but mile deep. We're going to capture a particular subset of academia, and there's a number of different exciting ones. I think ones where we could really solve the problem. So good example, and I was having a conversation with someone very senior yesterday who's in the private tutoring world. And what she told me is that one of the big problems that exists within academia is with students who have been excluded. So they've either been suspended, or they've been expelled, they're between colleges, or they've been between schools. And oftentimes these students just fall beneath the cracks, and they get left behind. If we can offer this technology to schools, and say, look, whilst the student is excluded, there's maybe scope to lend assistance. Or we focus in on, like, for example, the homeschooling market, which is becoming increasingly popular year by year, and is projected to grow, in popularity. That's another area that we can go. So it's a combination, but the coming months will make that determination as to.
There are so many ways to skin this cat. So many different go-to-market, strategies you could develop. This is. It's a good position to be in, to have these choices, but it's also a pretty common dilemma to be faced with. Well, we can serve this subsection of society, which direction do we go in, right? Where do we go first?
Exactly.
You've got different age groups to consider, different exam types to consider, private, public sector, all of this. So, but I'm really glad to hear you say what you said, which is that you are spending the time to iterate that, and it's good to know that also you've got the support from Rami on that, because of time and time again, I've been in this position as the first go-to-market, team member of startups, and I work with others that do. There seems to be this perception that in a startup, as soon as you hire a go-to-market leader, a revenue leader in your business, that they should be able to figure it out straight away and start selling. And
oftentimes goes wrong, very
yes,
wrong.
it does. And I have to explain time and time again to CEOs, no, lower your expectations. It's going to take at least 3 to 6 months for that person to figure out and do research and speak to people, because if they need to learn how to sell it, you don't know how to sell it. That's their job. So don't hire someone straight away thinking they're suddenly going to start bringing in all the sales. That's not how it works. It's an iterative process, just like building the products was,
There's a reason why, for example, Facebook started not with all students, but with Harvard students. There's a reason why, for example, when Amazon started, they started only with books. And then you are literally saying exactly what I say to founders I work with. I always use those two examples. And I say, Netflix, there's a reason why they started with DVD rentals. That's my third one. Exactly. You if you cast your net too wide, if you go too early, and I think this is, for those who are watching this particular podcast, this is a really important lesson that I've learned, in that in the startup world, especially in tech, when there's VC money and there's so much expectation from your stakeholders, from your customers, from your employees, there's this desire to move quickly, move fast, and break things. And that's actually one of the hallmarks that comes out of Palo Alto: go quickly. And that's true. You do need to move fast, because the technology, especially AI, it does move quickly. But simultaneously, there's oftentimes a need to take a step back and take a breath, assess the landscape. There's a very famous Chinese proverb which says, when there's no clear option, the best thing to do is to do nothing. And for a founder, especially, taking a breath can oftentimes be very valuable to the business.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the expression of move fast, think slow.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, there's you can't rush consideration.
Yeah. And once you've nailed your mask, so to speak, it's very difficult to then change direction. And so 100%. Think slowly, but move fast.
Well, it's a very exciting time, and you guys have got obviously a bit of a road ahead of you. But when do you imagine? Do you have any sense of when things might be launched? Maybe Rami, you could shed a bit of light on that. How are things looking from a product perspective? Do you feel like you've got a good sense of when you'll be able to sort of fully launch, or maybe at least go into an open beta phase as opposed to this more closed version?
Yeah, so we have cracked a couple of really difficult problems when it comes to engineering the product. And as soon as we crack something, we invite some of the early access users and say, hey, would you try this and see if it works in your use case?
Right.
And so we're kind of doing that iteratively. But I think we should be in a position, God willing, to open it up in December, or at least that's what we're aiming for.
Okay. Interesting timing. Yeah, that's good. So not too far away, really, all things is considered. Yeah, that's gonna be pretty quick. I mean, this year has already gone pretty damn quick. So interesting. So
Gregory, have gone bloody quick. I don't even know what happened during COVID.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it feels like someone has pushed the speed up button on time since COVID. It's like every year seems to get faster. I mean, it's obviously it's making me feel more and more like the chances of life being a simulation is very likely, just by the fact that I feel like now someone is just going, pause this, fast forward, this is boring, get to the good stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like someone's just skipping right now just to get to the next big event. Like that's what it is.
This life is an illusion.
Yeah, 100%. I'm with you on that one. At least a large part of it, anyway. But talking of life, though, like you're both incredibly fascinating people, which is why I had to speak to you. And thanks for telling me, obviously, about YouMakr. But I'm interested to learn a bit more about you two as individuals. So, Abs, you were very kind and with your introduction, talking about Rami. But Rami, what do we not know about? And we can obviously find out a bit more about you, and I've got a lot of questions for you. But what did Abbas not say about himself that maybe he should have? Because I feel like he's also quite a humble guy.
So if I was to summarize it, I can hand on heart say that I wouldn't be able to be here if it wasn't for Abbas. Like he's God's gift to me to actually balance out and complement skills that I don't have. And Abbas does that. Like even something as simple as this podcast probably wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Abbas. And so he is essentially embodies all the skills that a startup requires, which I don't have.
Right.
That's really the best summary I can describe Abbas with. So yeah, we're true co-founders, and we complement each other quite well.
That's how it should be. Yeah, it's meant to be two sides of the same coin, and you're meant to complement each other and fill each other's lack of skills or complement the ones that you do have. So I'm glad to hear that. So what is it that you did in your career, Abbas, do you think has served you well, and maybe not so well? Because if we talked earlier on about the fact that you came from a background which didn't allow for a huge amount of flexibility. That may have been quite a struggle for you when coming into this environment for the first time. But aside from that, what skills do you think you picked up along the way that have played a crucial part into being as useful as you clearly are?
So in terms of my job at YouMakr, I consider myself to be front of house. And so any role that involves talking, whether it's with customers or with potential customers, or with investors, or with and the end user, this particular I think skill, part of it is instinctive. It just comes from who I am. But actually, I did a venture outside of my career, which forced me to sell, and that required years of practice.
What was that? What was that venture?
It was like a shopping community. Randomly, I got involved in it, and ultimately it didn't work. But it was one of the best educations that I've ever received, and it just forced me to, I think, overcome any anxiety and just be utterly, I think, self-confident in terms of the mannerism of my speech, and I think that's really helped. But also, this may sound counterintuitive, but doing the work that I did in banking was in many ways soul destroying.
That I wasn't expecting you to end with that.
Sorry, no,
soul destroying. What you were going to say, useful or insightful, or prepared you? No, soul destroying. That's okay.
I think it's because I became increasingly disillusioned with the work that I was doing. It just conflicted so much with my personality, and I didn't see the value that I was adding.
What you mean ethically it was conflicting, societally you weren't sure where you were contributing? How do you mean?
I don't think it's prudent for me to talk about ethics in investment banking,
right?
But I think your viewers will make their own determinations as to the underlying ethics of that industry. But I think it just came to the fact that I was just sitting at my desk, bunch of monitors, and I was just staring outside the window going, what am I doing with my life? And there's a very famous saying that the salary that they give you, it's a bribe. It's a bribe to give up on your dreams. And I was just restless. I was looking for something. And then I, by the grace of God, Rami comes up to me and he says, look, I've got an idea. And I was like, great, let's do that. And I just jumped head first. That's
how all great adventures start, right? With one person coming up to another and going, hey, I've got an idea. The rest is history. But just to go off on a sidetrack briefly, and then we'll come back to this. I'm curious, that sense of dread that you felt, that sense of feeling that you were maybe wasting your life and in that career, how do you guys foresee ensuring that your company doesn't end up creating that same sense in future employees or current employees, however it may stand? How do you feel about that? What have you got planned to avoid that from happening? Because you're going to be employers yourselves.
Yeah,
right.
Great question. I think in the first instance, point number one is that best idea wins. Best idea wins. It doesn't matter if it comes from Rami, me, or anybody else. We look at it on its merits as opposed to where it came from. And I think that fosters a very intuitive, a very nimble, a very kind of go-getting type of culture, point one. Point two is that, we don't particularly care as to a candidate's background, in terms of their academic background or their professional background, or, we just care that for the role, they add value. And right. I think when you do that, you then move away from looking at the quintessential way in which people are assessed in this life and oftentimes in this industry. For my team, hands down, as God willing, I grow the sales team. If you've done, 3 years in some front office role at some top tier investment bank selling, top tier management consultant, Oxbridge background, or, I've encountered, this is in my travels, there was a shoe salesman, selling shoe cleaning products. The level of endeavor, humility, application of that person selling shoe cleaner was infinitely more than anything I've encountered on a more quintessential professional basis. I think actually that's where you find the risk mitigation in having your company turn into the quintessential kind of machine, with all the kind of functions and everything else. And that's not to say that we're not going to build a company in that particular way, but I think the hiring is going to be a lot more nuanced than others, and I think that will help to protect us, God willing.
Are you going to be a remote first organization as you grow, or is the plan to also have an office and ask people to come in? Do you have any sort of strategies for that?
I think when we started, we were very cognizant of our runway, and I'll be honest with you, Greg, there are many companies that I've seen ultimately fold, not because they have bad people or bad products. It's just because they have poor cash flow. So the maintenance of our working capital is, very high on our priority list. Then COVID happened. And now we are in an era where there's very high cost of capital, low liquidity, relatively low confidence. And investment money is harder to come by. We're one of the few fortunate ones to have raised in this climate, by the grace of God. But I think all of those variables amalgamated together, lend to a remote approach first and foremost. We believe that there's going to be a time in our future when there's going to be a much more personable, a much more tangible presence, and less decentralized. But for the time being, as we are in this phase of the company's journey, we have to be reticent of our burn.
No, I only ask because it's an interesting predicament, I think, for businesses who want to work, and build an organization remotely. It's a set of challenges, unlike other companies have faced historically. A huge amount of opportunity, like you said, being able to keep burn low, not having to worry about the overheads associated with renting office space and all of the other costs, and obviously people's well-being seems to be generally improved by not having to make the commute and so on. But there's a whole set of challenges there that I work with a lot of my clients on a lot of the time, especially with sales teams, in that it's far more difficult to instill a culture, to have control over that culture, and all those values that you talked about. It's a lot more difficult to implement them because you just don't have as much control over that, really, and how people interact with their work is vastly different. You're having to take the approach more of managing output rather than managing the process, and sorry, go ahead.
for a startup, I think having a physical office and everybody being in the same place nowadays is a luxury for a startup to have that. It's I believe it is better for a startup to have that environment, because startups are all about ideas and spontaneous interactions, and that lends to coming up with solutions. It's serendipitous, for people to be in an office and interact, and someone will say something that will spark an idea in someone else's mind, and that kind of like feeds on itself until a particular solution comes up, and it happens a lot faster in that environment. But again, that's a luxury. Can you afford it? A lot of startups in today's globalized world probably can't, unless they've raised millions, of course. So yeah, you're just going to have to be far more deliberate about the communication that you have if you're a remote company. You actually need to think through, how can we emulate a physical interaction online? How can we do that to the best of our ability and be more deliberate, like actually put efforts into having Zoom meetings and communication and sitting down with the development team and just like spend time brainstorming, even if it's just like cracking some jokes. Just having that will help. Now, in terms of what you asked earlier about, how do you build a culture that doesn't end up becoming like an investment banking environment? Sorry, Abbas.
or any job that could be soul destroying, right? Let's not just harp on about investment banking. I'm sure there's some great investment banking organizations out there that people love working for.
I read a book that I think taught me a lot about this particular question. It's called Small Giants. And basically it talks about companies who choose to stay slightly smaller, even when they do have an opportunity to grow big. For the company leaders, once you grow to 1,000 employees, company leaders will have no way of having that personal touch with the employees anymore. It becomes kind of like a broadcasting exercise where, management has something to say and they broadcast it. And there isn't like us sitting in a room with the entire team and just talking like friends or a family would do, for example. And so those companies, they choose to be small in order to retain that spirit in the company. And he introduces, like the author of the book introduces kind of a difference in those companies that he highlighted. And he's saying basically that the big companies, the soul-destroying companies, it's basically you have the shareholders that come as a first priority. Then you have the customers, second priority. Last priority is the employees. And the author of the book basically flips that formula on its head. And he's saying like the companies that always prioritize their employees and they rally their resources in service of the employees, they tend to create the best cultures. And then as a second place is the customers, and at the last place is the shareholders. Those that actually follow that framework tend to create better companies. So I think that's very exciting.
And longer term shareholder value. It's counterintuitive, but actually in the long term, the shareholders make more money with that approach. I think a second point is worth mentioning is that we're a SaaS company, and SaaS companies historically don't need an abundance of human capital to scale and have very far-reaching effects. I mean, take Twitter for example. Twitter has massively cut back its headcount. Still remains incredibly effective, and there's nothing stopping Twitter continuing to grow with the exact same headcount that it has. Is now not dependent upon more people coming into the organization, and that's one of the advantages of a SaaS company.
I mean, again, you used an example that I was literally just thinking of Twitter, and the fact that Elon's Musk approach to that, he understands that exact framework you just talked about there, and that 10% of the workforce does 90% of the work, and realized that Twitter created a bureaucracy machine essentially. The decisions couldn't be made effectively or quickly. That, like you were talking about, Alice, you can't make effective change in an organization like that. Things can't be pivoted on and things like that. And he recognized that as one of the biggest problems of the company, and just so an enormous amount of you are gone. I think it was well over half of the employees out the door. See you later. And that's quite a common thing with modern leaders who take over large corporations. They recognize that there's a lot of dead weight and they just need to make things a bit leaner, and that's not a bad move. But I'm really glad to hear you say that as well about being, recognizing that as almost a strategy, essentially, for your growth, to recognize that you need to keep it lean and keep it small, because that's something that I think all too often founders get a little overexcited about the prospects of getting revenue and or investment, and just go, oh, we're going to have hundreds of people, and it's like, and that's almost a status thing to say. I've worked with companies like that.
Definitely
proud to say we've grown to X amount of people over this period, and it's like, that's not impressive. What's impressive is how much revenue you turned over, and more importantly, how much profit you made. Where's the profit? Why is no one talking about profit anymore? It drives me up the fucking wall. By the way, we can swear in this. It drives me up the fucking wall that no one talks about profit anymore in business. And
revenue is vanity, profit is sanity.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And I think as an accountant, like I'm readily aware of our cash flow, but also both ends of the P&L, and the ultimate aim for a startup such as ourselves isn't to hire an abundance of staff or to have a flagship office. It's exactly what you're saying, Greg. It's ultimately creating shareholder value, and we do so in serving our customers and solving their problems. And if we can do that, then we're on a good footing. God willing, we'll keep going.
For Abbas and I, a far more impressive thing, and that's actually where should be the measure of the status, is when we hear of a tech company that scaled to 100 million in revenue with a team of like 6 people. That we're impressed by. Like, I mean, achieving such a feat is really what, for me, I mean, those founders are legends.
Yes, I agree.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm the same as you. If I hear those stories, and I actively seek out stories about even solo founders who are able to produce multi-million-dollar companies, who are solo tech founders, and there are a lot more of them than we think. Who, like, especially if you look into things like Chrome extensions. There's a surprisingly large amount of millionaires in the Chrome extension space, all solo. Like, they haven't got a single employee. They just created something, they released it, it went well, and they're on to the next project. Like, damn, that's impressive. But yeah, like even a small team, absolutely. You don't need that vanity metric. If think of if there's something you can do it. You don't need someone else necessarily to be doing it.
I've read a similar type of case study on people who create GIFs. Do you know GIFs? The short animations. People have become extremely wealthy just
really interesting
generating GIFs and quitting their jobs and just doing that absolutely full time. And it goes to show you don't need 500 people to create $1 billion company.
Yeah, exactly. And you also don't need to have necessarily the most super advanced, newest, innovative thing in the world. You just need to give what people want, and sometimes that can be quite simple,
And I think that relates very well to YouMakr's endeavor and our underlying mission in that if we can help students be more prepared for their exams, uplift their confidence, reduce their anxiety, help them be better with their time management, especially do so in regions where the classroom sizes in some countries in South Asia are like 60 to 1. They're not going to have the chance to get themselves out of their current economic state. And so that's I think it's a dream, but worth fighting for.
Yeah, and it's one that there's definitely an argument to be made that you're in the space of positive social impact. That it's not just a tech company or a new AI company. That that you're looking at solving a real societal problem here, and I think there's a good case for that. I don't think that would be in any way, trying to adopt a term, to try and make yourselves look better. Like, you actually are tapping into a very important societal issue here. Not whether it's in Asia or here at home, wherever, like that, every country has these problems. So,
yeah, I think education, especially what's happening now, Greg, is that in the post-COVID, we had the Lehman crisis of 2008, and that stretched government finances. And then we had the sovereign debt crisis, and then we had COVID, and finances are shot, especially in the UK.
Yeah.
But this is a similar story in many regions across the world, in EMEA, East Asia, Latin America, and even North America and Europe as well. Like, education isn't a priority for governments, point one. And there isn't the resources available to help solve what are the many problems in academia. And it's, in my view, largely dependent upon private enterprise to solve these problems. Because I can assure you, it's not the problem. The solutions are not going to come from local government, municipal government, or national government. It's going to come from enterprise.
They're not going to come from an organization that's only interested in being elected for another 4 years. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, look, Rami, same thing to you. I mean, I grilled Abs there a little bit on his background, and your background's been alluded to somewhat. I'm curious to know more about that, because you've done some very interesting things in your time. So, physicist, inventor, previous entrepreneur, refugee. Yeah, I mean, tell me more about you, what you've been up to over the years, and more importantly, tell me how on earth you've managed to do it all in such a short period of time.
That's what I want to know.
Yeah, because now I'm starting to believe that you are either supernatural, or maybe you have a twin you're not telling people about.
I actually think Rami is the next, I think he's like the Arab version of Elon Musk. I mean, colossal stuff, thank God.
When Abbas earlier said that, Rami's calm and collected, and it's like, we talked about all that. To be honest, where that comes from is from my religious convictions. Like, that's really what anchors me. Like, when the going gets tough and I don't freak out, is because it's my religious conviction that gives me this inner peace that, there's a plan. There's a plan, and we're going through the motions. And when I have convictions in that, I just it just, things work out a lot better. And when I say, like, how did you do it? Honestly, I don't feel I've done much. It just so happened that I was put in a position, or I put in a series of circumstances, and I just had to accept those experiences with grace and run with them. And I think that's really the secret to it. It just is just the way things turned out. Now, I want to focus a little bit about the refugee element. Obviously, I've moved a lot. So I was born in Iraq. I've grown up in Sweden, studied in the UK, then moved to the US. So I've kind of seen a lot of cultures. I've been able to empathize with a lot of different people and the problems that they have, the way they their approach to solving problems, etc. The one challenge that I had growing up, especially in Sweden, given that I didn't speak Swedish when we first moved there, is I fell behind when it comes to my academic achievements. Language was really tough. I managed to crack maths, I managed to crack physics, sciences, but language, that was really tough for me. And it feeds into everything else. So it was such a huge handicap for me to kind of I was always catching up. And so when you asked us earlier on about, are we excited about the current trajectory that we're on? Actually, there's a personal, there are personal experiences that I went through which make me relate to students who have been left behind because of certain handicaps like that. And what really makes me excited is what we're building here is a product that should exist.
Because if it had existed when you were going through that, you would have absolutely jumped on it.
Exactly. This product, and like when you think about the idea, now that it has been distilled in our minds, we really believe that this product should exist. It's such an obvious thing, and it's going to solve problems for so many students. But the fact that it levels the playing field somewhat is what really makes us excited. And when we think about the greater good, we think, yes, we have something amazing here. We should pioneer it.
Yeah. That's so. Did you? I mean, and I'm in agreement. By the way, I'm not brushing that off. I absolutely agree, and that's good to hear. But do you mind me asking? Did you eventually learn Swedish?
Yeah.
You did. So you fluent in Swedish?
Yeah. I had to.
Wow, no, that's impressive. Not an easy language to learn, I suppose. Especially, I don't know. Probably, I would imagine one of the most difficult aspects of that is the difference in the extreme difference in structure as a language to that of your native. What language do you natively speak?
My mother tongue is Arabic.
In Arabic, right? So yeah, I mean, structurally incredibly different. Based in very, very different linguistical foundations there. So, but I now assume that because you have a good understanding of Arabic and European languages, so English and something like Swedish, you must be pretty good at being able to pick up languages now, because if you have the understanding of those foundations, right?
I think that's true when it comes to the Latin languages. So, for example, if you learn Spanish, it's easier to pick up Portuguese and Spanish. So, like, there are a collection of languages that holds true. But, for example, when you go from Arabic to Swedish to Chinese to, like completely different languages, I don't think that matters as much. But I was fortunate in a sense that when we moved to Sweden, I was still young. And so when you're young, you can kind of like pick it up.
A bit more malleable, yeah.
It's also like just to give you some understanding as to how difficult it is. Arabic is written from right to left, and Swedish is written from left to right. Just that in and of itself. I mean, I don't know how he did it, but he's being overtly modest, because Rami has an exceptional ability to absorb information, analyze it, synthesize it, evaluate upon it, and understand it like faster than almost anybody that I know. I know, when one of the advantages of working in banking especially is that you're surrounded by some very, very, very intelligent people. And that's certainly been the case in my career. But I haven't met anybody like Rami. That guy is he's a machine.
There's a chance that you may actually be AI, Rami. I think that's what we're getting to.
It's possible.
Because what you've just described there is a large language model, like, just so we're clear. But yeah, so what was I going to ask you about there? You just made it. Yes, you mentioned about your faith and how that plays a big part in your demeanor, in the way that you deal with things. I find that infinitely interesting. I'm not a man of faith myself. I consider myself to be what do I consider myself to be? A Jewish atheist, I guess, because I've got Jewish heritage, which, if your mother's Jewish, that makes you Jewish. I'm not a practicing Jew. I don't believe in any particular deity. I'm somewhat agnostic and mostly an atheist, I guess. So yeah, I sit in very much in the middle of lots of different things. And one of the things that I struggle with when it comes to religion is, funnily enough, the thing that you just brought up there. And I'd be curious to know what you think about, both of you, because I'm assuming you're both men of faith. Yes. And it's this idea that there is a plan. And the reason why I struggle with that is because, for me, it feels like it robs the individual from the responsibility, both good and bad, for if things go wrong and if things go right. So like you just said there, well, you're following God's plan. So you've had all of these fortuitous things occur, and you're attributing that to someone else. I feel like that's doing you a massive disservice there, because of, from my perspective, as someone who doesn't believe in a God, you're responsible for those things, and you should give yourself more credit. So and then equally, if things go bad, then potentially, I don't know, do we blame ourselves in that situation as religious individuals, or do we own up to that and take responsibility and move on from that? So I don't know, I'm just curious, do you feel like you're giving in some way someone else credit for your own achievements there a little bit?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Abbas.
No. I think I don't know. Do you want to take it? I don't know.
Sure.
It's a big question. And look, I never said this was going to be an ezy conversation. I'm throwing the things at you, so I was just curious.
We have no idea we'll be talking about this. I promise you. Well, I'm glad it's come up. It's a phenomenal question. Like faith in startups. Rami, go for it, and then I'll God willing give my thoughts.
I think we kind of like touched on it a little bit earlier when you mentioned, for example, the what did you say? Illusion. What did you say? The kind of like the famous idea about this world being
this simulation.
Simulation. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They will live in a simulation. And so, like, if you think about this simulation idea that we are somewhere else and we have been kind of put into this simulation that has been orchestrated for a certain purpose. Now, what that purpose is, maybe we don't know yet, but let's just run this with the idea of that simulation. Now, if you are in a simulation and whoever put you in that simulation, you somehow find a connection with, and you create this trust. You have this trust that whoever put you in that simulation is doing it for the right reasons. Not sinister reasons, but for the right reasons, to bring out the best qualities in you. It's almost like, let's say I build an AI, or I build a hologram, and I come to you and say, hey, Greg, I'm going to put you into this hologram, and you're going to go through a number of experiences. And those experiences, some of them are going to be hard, some of them are going to be joyous, but a combination of those experiences are going to bring out your innermost qualities, and you're going to come out the other end of that hologram a much more experienced, more solid person. And I think when we look at life in that sense, and I've experienced this myself, is I noticed people who see it as a hologram simulation illusion kind of thing, where there is a purpose and there is a plan, it kind of changes their entire outlook on the world. And that outlook starts feeding into everything you do. Now, to your question, do I feel like I've been robbed of some credit? I don't think so. I actually, sometimes when things happen, that yes, I mean, I have participated in the mechanics of achieving a certain outcome, and maybe there is a bit of credit there. But what I feel far more is that I feel blessed, that I've been put into a situation that turns out so well, and I feel almost like I'm the chosen one. I've been chosen to be put into a certain position, into a fortuitous position. And so, no, I don't feel like I've been robbed of credit. I feel there is an abundance of blessing that gives me encouragement to keep going.
Yeah, interesting. Sorry, Abbas, before I get your answer to my tricky question there, I just quickly want to throw in that's really interesting, your summary of that, because that's a similar philosophy, I guess, I have on my life, but taken from the atheistic standpoint, based on ideas such as, which to some people can be quite daunting, but I actually take quite a lot of comfort in, which is in the idea that the universe is random, that it's mostly chaos, and so on. And there's a lot of data and research done on this idea that the chances of being born are infinitesimally small, right? That your odds of being alive at any point in the history of the universe are infinitesimally tiny, you being you. And in some ways, I take exactly that same thing. I consider life and every aspect of it a blessing because of that fact, that it's the chances of me being here at this time, in this body, in this country, is just, absolutely astronomically ridiculous. And then in that same notion as well, this idea that there's that life is kind of something that is there.
A friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, subscribe for more, and join the conversation in the comments. It really helps us out. Thank you.
That every interaction we have, every experience we have just makes us a better human being. That's where I start going into the territory of thinking, well, if there is a God, I believe the God to be actually everyone. Because if God is there to test you, well, then everyone put on the planet is responsible for the trials and tribulations that you go through. So in some respects, we're all God, which is which I just thought I'd share that thought with you. But Abbas, what about you? What's I know you have a few things you want to say on this topic.
I think I'll start from a kind of broader perspective and then try and drill down further to your question. I mean, ultimately, what we're discussing here is a lifelong debate between kind of like evolution and creationism. Now, what you're saying from your perspective, Greg, is that if there is an all-knowing, all-powerful God, and something happens to me, or in your case, if you make a particular determination, a decision, whatever, and something good comes of it, then you're saying it's going to, quote unquote, rob you of your freedom. Whereas the way in which I think Rami and I believe is that God is in control of everything, but simultaneously we have freedom of choice.
You have free will.
We have free will.
Yeah.
All within the confines of the godly system. And so whilst I have made the determination, God is ultimately running everything. And I think when I look at it from that perspective, in that I still have freedom of choice, it's within the confines of that godly system. That's how I reconcile it. That actually I'm not being, quote unquote, robbed of the decision making. It's still ultimately my decision, but it stays within the godly framework. That's kind of point one. Point two is that, further to your point about, look, the universe is, what you said was that the universe is, quote unquote, chaos. Whereas I believe the universe to be wonderfully designed. And actually that's spoken about in scripture. It's very much emphasized in the Quran. But there's a really powerful scientific assessment of life, and it's actually really profound. And it says the likelihood of just life originating by chance is comparable to a dictionary being compiled from an explosion in a printing factory.
Yeah.
So imagine there's just a printing factory and it just randomly explodes, and then a dictionary is compiled. Every single letter just falls into place randomly, and it just compiles a perfect book. There comes a point in mathematics when the likelihood of an event occurring is practically, theoretically impossible. And this life, this world, I think has gone way beyond, by an order of magnitude, that probability. Yeah, it is statistically zero.
Well, I don't want to get too far into this because it's a bit of a wormhole, but like I suppose the quantum mechanic explanation for that would just be, and you may be able to, Rami, say something to this, considering that you study physics. I'm not a physician, so I might get this completely wrong. But I believe that the response there would be, well, if you had an infinite number of book factories exploding, then your chance of actually creating a dictionary would no longer become, it would be a certainty. It would no longer become. You see what I mean? Like it's about the opportunity for something to occur. In the same way that if you were to flip a coin, infinitely for the forever, then you would eventually get every combination, and that you would eventually probably just get like 10 heads in a row. Like suddenly probability changes by the length of time in which you have something. But then equally, I don't think that actually in any way this discourages that idea of creationism. I think that there's a harmony in both the scientific side of things and in the religious side of things when it comes to that debate.
Eventually I actually wrote a book in Swedish.
Of course you did.
You forgot to mention author as well.
Yeah, was it a bestseller? Because I assume it was.
I'm just going
to assume it was, and that you were on Oprah. And
No, I never published it. But
okay.
The reason I brought it up is because it talks about this particular, philosophical questions in terms of like mysticism combined with science,
right,
physics, and how do you reconcile the two, etc. And so, absolutely. Like, for example, if the multiverse theory was real and there are an infinite number of universes, then and a certain outcome is inevitable. In fact, every outcome possible is inevitable, because there's an infinite number of universes. The trouble with that theory is we don't know that there is an infinite number of universes. There is a theory. In fact, it's a belief. That's a belief system. In the same way that God is a belief system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Infinite number of universes is also a belief system to try and explain. Now, what is more likely for something to exist an infinite number of times, which is actually something that we've never quantifiably, we've never actually measured infinity. We don't have any real examples of infinity. It's a theoretical concept. But we do have precedents for someone creating something. That's the more likely mechanism for something to come into being. So that's why I choose the intelligent design theory as opposed to the infinity of universes. But there is one meme that I really like, and I think it kind of bridges the gap in the understanding. And then the meme goes like, they show a picture of twins in a mother's womb. Okay, so there's basically two babies in a mother's womb, and there's a picture of that, and then they have like thought bubbles or like speech bubbles, as if like the twins are talking to each other. And one twin is telling the other twin and is asking them, and he's saying, "Hey, brother, do you believe in life after birth? Do you believe in mom?" And the other twin,
the great mom,
yeah. Do you believe in the great mom that is sustaining us and providing for us and surrounding us and is all around us? And the other twin turns around to the other brother and say like, "Nah, I don't believe in that nonsense. I mean, have you ever seen mom? I don't believe in life after birth. Like, that have you?" And so I think that kind of like is a great analogy, because if you want to try and understand the belief of people like me and Abbas, the way we believe it in is exactly the same way, that the universe is almost like a cradle that God is holding and surrounding every single thing that is within it. In the same way that the mom is feeding these babies, we're getting our daily provisions. We're getting our, like all that is happening within this little simulation, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so like it's a completely different way of thinking about reality. But I think what's more fascinating is when you adopt a certain point of view of the world, it does have a significant impact as to how you go through the world. It's like experiences that you put through. And so, for example, this lends to our startup experience. That particular point of view, that worldview, when I speak to other founders, I see it as an advantage that I'm holding, because it makes my journey so much more palatable, so much easier, because I feel like there are other forces surrounding me, and I'm kind of like moving alongside it, as opposed to resisting, some random plan that has targeted me to. I don't know if you understand.
No, I know what you mean. It, to some extent, and maybe correct me if I'm not summarizing this correctly, but it sounds to me like you're embracing this idea that you are being empowered through some means other than yourself that allows you to execute, as opposed to maybe going through life feeling something of a victim, which I think a lot of people do. If you feel the world is against you and that everything is a struggle, which it can be, but if your perception of that is just, that it's unfair and that you don't understand why it's happening, as opposed to, I understand I'm being tested, then it's a very different approach. You suddenly deal with problems in a different way, and in some ways I massively agree with you, and I don't know where that comes from, but because as I said, I'm not religious, but I feel like there's some approach there, to maybe a spiritual approach there that I adopt that's very similar in that, it would be very easy to sit down and go, well, this isn't fair. But instead I choose, much like you, to go, all right, bring it on. I get why you did this, and I can see the benefit to me going through this. So thank you. I don't know who you are or what, you know, like, yeah. So no, I completely understand. And I think that's, I agree. I would agree that gives you an advantage. Absolutely.
There's actually, the way in which Rami and I try to approach things is, if anything, for example, doesn't go well in our, not just business life, but in our personal lives, we ask ourselves, rather than asking ourselves, why is this happening to me? We ask ourselves, what is this trying to teach me?
Right.
I think having that ideology, that perspective, just makes the journey much more fun, much more efficient. So that's point number one. Point number two is that, I don't know, Greg, like in terms of this podcast and how many founders you've spoken to, but I imagine those that openly come out and say, look, I have a fear of God. I love worshiping God, and it's the core and most central thing in my life. I imagine Rami and I are probably in the minority.
Yeah, I think it's the first time I've had a conversation this in depth, at least, about religion, but I do find it incredibly fascinating and grateful that you're both willing to talk about it.
And the point I would make, I think from a founder perspective, or from a startup perspective, is that, you know, in this life that we live, like where there's the likes of the Elizabeth Holmes and the Sunny Balwanis and the Bernie Madoffs and the charlatans and the snake oil salesmen and all that jazz, actually having founders who are godly, who aspire to a particular standard and living their life in a particular framework, admittedly not always succeeding in that endeavor, but at least the aspiration is there. I think that's refreshing. I think, you know, if you're an investor and you're investing in a company and the founders, you know, subscribe to a particular faith, you then know at least there's a level of effort to do business, at least in the right way. And I think that's, as I say, I think it's refreshing, and I think more people should do it.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And to your first point about how when you experience something potentially, you know, negative or a hardship, and your approach, both of you, to look at that and say, okay, well, what can we learn from this experience, is something that as an approach that I think everyone should take, regardless of religion or no religion. Like that's just a healthy approach to dealing with problems, I feel like, you know, and it's not one that enough people do. Not enough people are analytical and also thinking inwardly about, you know, and being reflective about that. You know, what did I do wrong in that situation, or maybe to have, you know, caused that situation from arising? What can I do better? What can we do better? You know, those kinds of conversations. And ironically enough, I've met religious individuals who actually manage to use their religion as a reason to escape that analytical process and say, well, it went wrong. You know, it's God's fault. I don't need to dwell on it. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to spend any effort into thinking about how to avoid that from happening in future. Or the converse to that of just, you know, blaming God. And I think that's, you know, or blaming others, which again, you don't have to be religious or not to go through that, but just being a victim, either a victim of God or a victim of society. A victim is still a victim, right? So I think it's a very important philosophy that you both have that definitely gives you both a huge advantage, more so just from the philosophy perspective, not the religious one. It doesn't matter what God you believe in. What matters is how you conduct yourself, and that you're good human beings, right? That's what matters. So, but no, it's very interesting, and I appreciate the
conversation, Greg. Man, what a bloody podcast! Amazing.
I just like talking about things that I like talking about. These are things that I like talking about, and you know, my listeners seem to like hearing what we talk about, so I'll keep doing it. Yeah, my approach is to this is like, this is the kind of stuff that I would be talking to you guys about if we were sat in a cafe somewhere. You know what I mean? Like that's the way it is, you know. So
very stimulating podcast.
Amazing.
Well,
really
good. So, I'm glad you enjoy it. But I do have a couple more questions for you before I let you go, if that's okay. Because I'm curious
on the topic of spirituality. I actually have to pray, and I haven't prayed, and I've got I see the sun coming down ever so slightly, so I've only got a few more minutes to do it. So I can just do that, and
and then come back. Yeah. Do you also need to go, Rami?
I actually do.
Okay, let's take a let's.
I'm just gonna pray, but I actually can't come back because I have another appointment.
Oh, okay, no problem. Well, in that case, we can say goodbye, and then Abbas, you can go and pray, and then you can come back, and I'll just edit the break out. It's not a problem. I'll be here.
Beautiful. Okay? I appreciate you accommodating.
No, of course, no problem at all.
Greg, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Thank you for a very thought-provoking podcast, and pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure too. And hopefully we'll get to speak again soon. I'd love to have you on again and talk about it. And you're based in the States, right?
Right now in the UK, but yeah, ordinarily in the States.
London?
I'm currently in Scotland.
Oh, in Scotland. Oh, okay, lovely. Yeah. Well, look, it'll be maybe one day we'll bump into each other in some events here and there. But either way, we should definitely speak again. I'd love to catch up in a year about the progress of things, and I hope it all goes well. Through the beta and into the launch. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Speak soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hi.
Hello again. I just took the opportunity to get myself a drink and nip to the loo.
I appreciate you accommodating. That was
no, of course. Yeah, if I'd known, we could have arranged it at a different time. But we'll know for next time if we decide to do this again. So we can make sure we book it at a more convenient time next time.
Lou, Greg, honestly,
it does, doesn't it? Yeah.
I can't believe we've been talking for over 90 minutes, nearly 100 minutes.
Yes. Yeah.
Can't believe it went that quickly. I mean,
yeah.
Wow.
When people initially say, I tend to book 2 hours, and there's a bit of trepidation about them wanting to book in, and I say, trust me, it will go fast. And then once they do it, we come to the end, and I say, right, well, we're about to wrap up, and they're like, wait, what? We could keep going, But that's because we're having a good conversation.
It's part of your style, Greg. It's so fluid and there's no friction whatsoever. You feel so at ease and you're just willing to divulge and disclose and just, you have a really good manner, Greg. Honestly,
I appreciate that. Thank you. That really means a lot.
I'd love to, not just in the podcast setting. I mean, we should definitely hang out, man. It's such a joy to speak with you.
Absolutely. You're based in London, right?
Yeah. Based in London.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't get there that often. But I'm there usually for networking events. I actually volunteer at one whenever it's on. So yeah, when we're about town, maybe we should arrange to grab a coffee together and catch up. That'd be awesome.
I have a friend of mine. His name is Duccio Zambrini. He's one of the largest networkers in the UK. And he runs a host of networking events, like property networking event or there's crypto networking event, there's kind of startup networking event. He's got so many, and
awesome.
He's been doing it for years. And so basically, his next, I usually go to his ones because they're just so enjoyable, and he's been doing it so long. He's got such an eclectic mix of people that come to these events, and they're all at private members clubs in London. So they're not packed. It's just good amount of people. Yeah, come to one of those, or I can come to one of yours. I mean, it'll be good to catch up.
Yeah, send me some information about that. That'd be great. I'd love to go. I'm always looking for new, I'm on the lookout for new things to go to, new people to meet. And as you can tell, I love conversations. So I just love meeting new people and getting new ideas about things. And I'm like a sponge. I just want to get it all in my head and probably forget it moments later, but at least I try. But yeah, the biggest thing I love doing is just having conversations with people. Like the last event, like I said, I volunteered, and my main responsibility for the guy who runs it, who I know quite well now, he'd asked me to go around and tell people essentially about the Slack community for the network group and try, basically, say, look, join. It's great. It's more of this, but it's there kind of thing. And I was like, that's a perfect job for me, because I get to walk around and speak to people. And of course, as I'm talking to them, they're like, what do you do? And I explain, I'm a commercial advisor. So, I advise people and on how to make money and this, that, and the other. And then they start throwing questions at me. And I'm like, right, this is what you need to do. And then I'm off half an hour later and I've only talked to one person. I'm like, sorry. It's fun. I enjoy it. So, but yeah, any information you have on that, I would love to know about it. And it would be, like you said, it'd be great to meet in person and chat even more. But, yeah, and we are coming towards the end, so we'll look at wrapping it up a little bit. Yeah, I'm just curious. Have you had any more thoughts since you ran off to pray about what we were talking about to summarize, or are you happy me to ask you the next question that I have on my mind?
I think the final point that I made just on a startup founder being godly, I think is a positive.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
Industry for the investment base. For me, it's been the saving grace of my life. I mean, I don't know what I'd be doing if it wasn't for my religion.
It's interesting because in some ways I agree to an extent, but then in some ways I almost want to catch myself and say it shouldn't matter, right? In the sense that in the same way that gender or race shouldn't matter. I had this conversation recently with someone actually about this, because there's a lot of politics around race and gender at the moment, especially gender, and especially in the world of business, and how many female founders there are, or how many founders of color there are, et cetera, et cetera. And my response to that has always been that it shouldn't matter. I don't think we should be looking at filling quotas. It's about great ideas. It's about the quality and measurability of someone as an individual, their personality and their soul. I think that is, to me, what is most valuable. And it doesn't matter what gender they've been prescribed or race or where they've grown up. That shouldn't play a factor. And I wonder if religion in some way should fall into that. While I understand that, of course, there is an association there between those two things, however, that's different compared to maybe skin color and gender. That's where I'm not too sure, because of actually a lot of those philosophical frameworks actually come from a particular religion, right? So that's where I'm uncertain.
So I have difficulty in amalgamating between these kind of like very worldly predicaments, this gender debate. And for the record, I believe there's two genders, as is prescribed in my faith.
Likewise.
As it relates to race in technology, or the fact that case in point, I think I read somewhere that only 3% of venture capital money goes to female founders, which I thought was an extraordinary statistic.
Yeah.
And you take all of these discussion points, all of these conflicting viewpoints, as you say, it's oftentimes politicized. But then I think there's a material dichotomy between all of these discussions, which are very worldly, and the discussion that we were having specific to God,
right.
Which transcends, I think, this world. And so I don't know if there's much scope for overlap in that regard, because now we're talking about something that's much bigger than ourselves. There's actually a very famous verse in the Quran which says, "This life is but fun and games. This life is but fun and games," and it links very nicely to your earlier point about this life being an illusion. And so, we're talking. The best means by which I can explain it is that if you were to live on this earth for 100 years, or even if you were to extend that to 1,000 years, even if you were to extend that to 10,000 years, Greg, it's finite. There's a beginning and an end. Whereas if you adopt a religious perspective, especially if you subscribe to Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, the monotheistic faiths, you are of the opinion that the afterlife, and there is an afterlife, is infinite. And so, irrespective of the length, severity, inclination of this time on Earth, whether it's 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, relative to the afterlife is zero. Thing divided by infinity is zero. And so I think this lends to Rami's point quite nicely, in that we try not to take things too seriously. We try not to get caught up in the wave, and inevitably, as a startup founder, you're going to go through a wave of emotions. And I think hopefully that provides some perspective as to like some of the differing discussions which are pertinent, and which I have an interest in, certainly, relative to what I think to be the godly discussion, which pales everything else in comparison.
Yeah, because of the scale of that, as a
scale, the magnitude, the prowess, majesty, all of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because and again, I don't want to go too deep on this. Maybe we'll save this for when we grab a coffee together to go in more detail. But I have some thoughts around afterlife, and I actually do believe in something. I won't explain exactly what it is because we would need a whole other 2 hours perhaps to get into that. But not as created by a deity or necessarily any individual force, but rather something as a result of existence itself. And for that, in fact, that again, it almost deifies existence for me and makes that just like the sort of the chances of being alive, and put it sort of in combination, then makes life that much more special. In some ways, in that it is in the same viewpoint, that you made, that it is actually a tiny fraction of what my consciousness is likely to experience, and in fact that I'm very likely to experience, I believe, an infinite amount of experience through consciousness, and this is going to be probably just a very, 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 very small, almost non-existent portion of that experience. So it's interesting. We kind of share that thought. I haven't got that maybe as clear as perhaps you do. I don't know. But because I don't have a framework for that I'm using, I'm trying to figure out my own, which probably isn't a good idea. Maybe I should look to my heritage for my inspiration. That it's already written down there. I don't know, or someone else's. But
so there's 2 points I would make. Is the first is that if you look at this life, the world that you see around you, the buildings, the trees, the animals, the humans, the laptops, whatever. It's a combination of cells, effectively. It's a combination of cells. But if you were to open up that cell, Greg, what you'll find is a very, 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 very minuscule neutron. Around it, there are spinning electrons. But most of what's in that cell is empty space. The overwhelming majority of what's in a cell is emptiness. And so, further to your point, this world being quote unquote an illusion, it's actually literally so. And so that's point number one. Point number two is that Rami and I don't subscribe ourselves to quintessential or traditional Islam. We believe actually that organized religion is corrupt. I think that's the word that we would use.
I would probably be inclined to agree with that statement. Yeah,
it's flawed, it's corrupt, and whilst it does do good in the world, let's not shy away from the evil that's also propagated. And this discussion that we are having, and oftentimes these discussions are very much philosophical, ideological, subjective, arbitrary. What Rami and I found, and this actually lends to the Jewish faith, is that if you were to assess the monotheistic faiths, specifically Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the central message, or the core philosophy, aside from doing good, don't cheat on your wife, don't steal, all this other stuff, which is specific to all three, the core message across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is that A, there is a God, and B, there's one God. Monotheism, the concept of one God. And if you were to look at the Jewish text, specifically, I'm not talking about the Talmud, I'm talking about the Torah. And if you were to look at Aramaic, the language in which the Bible was written, or if you were to look at Arabic, the language in which the Quran is written, if you were to take the word one in Hebrew, i.e. one God, one in Hebrew, one in Aramaic, one in Arabic, what you'll find is that prior to an established numerical system, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and we have numbers. Actually, in the time of the Prophet Muhammad in Mecca, there wasn't an established number system. What they did is that they used letters as a mechanism to measure and to quantify. And the same was in the case of Jesus and Aramaic. They didn't, and the same was the case with Moses and Hebrew. It's not too dissimilar to like Roman numerals. They just use letters and they substitute numbers for each letter. If you were to take the word one in Aramaic, the numbers that were attributed back then in that system, if you add up each letter in that particular word, the word one specifically, you get the number 19. If you were to do so in Hebrew, the word one in Hebrew, in that numerical system, the number adds up to 19. And if you do the same thing in Arabic, the word one in Arabic is wahid, W-A-H-D, or the equivalent Arabic letters. Again, you get 19. What Rami and I subscribe to is less opinionated, but rather very scientific approach to religion. We disassociate ourselves from the commentary or the politics, but because of this very intricate numerical system, and it actually says in the Quran that, look, this is a mathematical book. There is an entire miraculous coding within the Quran which does away with the subjectivity or the opinions or even discussions like the ones we're having, creationism versus evolution, On the back of this intricate, amazing mathematical miracle, it proves overwhelmingly the existence of God. And for Rami and I, that's the basis upon which we have, I think, found our religion, abandoned traditional Islam, and subscribed ourselves to this particular philosophy, not because of an inclination or an instinct, but because we believe it to be proven mathematically.
That's interesting. So what is the significance of the number 19 in all of that?
Well, it's everywhere within the Quran. So, for example, the first verse of the Quran is in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. And that has 19 letters. You would say that's a coincidence. And I said that's a coincidence. If you take, for example, the number of chapters in the Quran, there's 114, which is 19 times 6. Again, a coincidence. If you were to take, for example, the number, well, if you were to take, for example, all of the numbers that are mentioned in the Quran, so that it mentions one God, it mentions the 7 sleepers of Ephesus, it mentions, 3,000 angels guarding you. It talks about, the 7 universes. If you were to add up every single number mentioned in the Quran, it comes to like 6,554, which is 19 times a number. If it was one more or one less, it wouldn't be divisible. But embedded within the Quran is this phenomenal, very intricate, very simple to understand, impossible to imitate mathematical code, which transcends all of the letters, which transcends all of the chapters, which transcends all of the text. And then all of these small coincidences just keep on adding and adding and adding and adding and adding together, not just in Arabic, but in the Christian text, but also in the Jewish one as well. And it proves without any shadow of a doubt that there is a God, because only God could have written a mathematically coded book.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. I'd heard something similar like that about the Torah.
It was Rabbi Judah the Pious. He actually stumbled across the same code in the Torah. And it's based specifically around the 19 based mathematical miracle.
Interesting.
And it's like
so then all 3 are talking about the same God, presumably.
Oh yeah, 100%. Every single one. The same God.
So which religion's right?
So we subscribe to the notion, per the Quran, that every time a community is established on earth, they are sent a messenger, for example. So you're given, for example, Abraham, and then you're given Joseph and Jonah and Lot. In the case of Christianity, it's Christ, and then each one of these messengers of God, they promote and they advocate for one singular message, which is worship God alone. Indeed, there's actually a verse in the Quran, which is in chapter 3, which says, those who are Jewish, those who are Christian, and those who are converts, those who believe in God, lead a righteous life, and believe in the hereafter, they will have nothing to fear, nor will they grieve. And so you can, if you dedicate yourself to one God, you don't commit any idol worship, and you stay within a framework which is entirely godly, you are practicing monotheism, pure monotheism, which is exactly what Jesus promoted, it's exactly what Abraham promoted, and it's exactly what Muhammad promoted. And so you can technically be a Jewish quote unquote submitter, you can be a Christian submitter, you can be a Muslim submitter, but the entire facet of the ideology is that you're dedicating yourself to one God, one supreme being.
It's interesting. And what does the Quran or any of these texts make clear why it is important to submit to one God? Like what's the rationale behind that in the sense of, yeah, like just why, essentially? Like, you know,
I think that's a question that has baffled humans since the dawn of mankind. Why am I here? What am I doing?
No, I don't mean that. I mean more so. You know, if the texts are saying, you know, so long as you submit to one God, then you will be spared, or like how you put it very eloquently just then. But why? What does it at any point explain why that's an important thing to do?
Oh yes, it goes to the very notion of redeeming your soul. And right. So you're familiar with so there is the concept of original sin, and basically this is actually, I believe, and this is what the Quran talks about as well, that this is actually misconstrued in modern day world, that people think the original sin is Adam eating from an apple in heaven, but actually the original sin stemmed from there being a heavenly community once upon a time, and in that heavenly community was God reigning supreme, and then there was angels, and there was one angel that developed these exaggerated ideas of being able to be a god next to God, and that angel is Satan. And in order, God knew that this is something that would occur, and God then created Adam and asked all of the angels to prostrate before Adam, and Satan refused, and he said, "I'm not going to do that." And then what God said was, "You are then banished. You are then sent away from this place. You can't be arrogant in this place." And what then happened was basically what Satan said was like, give me respite until the day of judgment. And in that moment, there was a heavenly feud. There are those who sided entirely with God, and according to the Quran, these are classified as angels. Then there are those who sided with Satan and said, actually, he can, manifest this particular claim, and they became jinns. And then there are those in the middle, us humans, who are not sure. And the way in which the Quran describes it is that we were given a chance to repent, and we refused. What we did is we wanted free will, which goes very nicely to our earlier discussion. We said, look, we want to see Satan's claim. And so I want the free will to make I'm going to make the right decision, but I just want to see if Satan's claim is correct. So we were sent down into this illusion, this dream world, to make one final stand against Satan and uphold God alone. And so you ask why, that's the kind of backstory to it that both Rami and I believe.
Interesting. That's really fascinating. And I don't think I've ever had anyone as put it to me as eloquently as that before as well. That's that's really interesting. Well, look, we are going to have to wrap it up, because otherwise we could probably keep going, as is often the case, which is good. So look, to shift gears a little bit, and by the way, my main takeaway from that is just that God doesn't do co-founders, by the sounds of it. So just to tie it back into the startup.
Can you please, if there is a portion of this edit that 100% makes it into the podcast, can you put that in, please?
Sure.
I beg you. That is my request.
Shall I start a t-shirt company? God doesn't do co-founders.
At the beginning. Do you know when you're doing a highlight reel?
Yeah. I'll put that. Okay, this will be the guy in the beginning. Okay. No problem. I will do. Request approved. I'll make sure of that. But yeah, just to wrap things up, then what I usually like doing really briefly at the end, if you're okay, just a couple more minutes. Sure. I just, for anyone listening out there, obviously the vast majority of the people listening are founders, just like yourselves, co-founders, and so on. And, you guys have been through a lot. So what are maybe some key tips or lessons that you've learned that you want to maybe share for others out there? Maybe things that people haven't thought about that could be quite useful.
I'm just going to leverage on the advice that I've received or I've read on my journey thus far. The first is, a very powerful commentary by Mark Andreessen, probably one of the best venture capitalists in history. What he said is that in VC world, they look at three quintessential areas, the team, the product, and the market. This is, advocated religiously at business school, whether you're at Harvard or at Said or whatever, that you look at these three core components and then you drill down, accordingly. And there's this kind of like debate, like, so what is most important? Is it the market? Is it the product? Is it the team? The lesson that I've learned, actually, and a lot of people say it's the product, are you solving the problem? And that's true, but there's a reason why, for example, Y Combinator in their application process, which is arguably the most successful accelerator in history, spends so much time looking at the team. Have they worked together? Are they able to grind it out? Stay positive, and not get run away with the emotion of it. That's advice point number one, that you're going to go on an absolute emotional journey during your startup. You're going to cry, you're going to be despondent, you're going to be disillusioned, you're going to be sad, you're going to be upset. It's going to strain your existing relationships. You're going to have no friends. It's oftentimes very lonely. But this is the world that you're getting into. And I didn't know that when I left Deutsche. This is what awaited me. And this brings me to point number two, that the emotional roller coaster, and everything that you learn along the way from a personal perspective, from a business perspective, there is absolutely no post-grad, whether it's the ACA, which is what I did, the MBA, the CFA, or anything else, comes even close to giving you the knowledge and the experience that a startup would do. So if you're thinking about doing a post-grad, join a startup, absolutely do that. And so that's point number two. Point number three, I just alluded to it earlier. There's a huge desire, emphasis, requirement almost to move quickly. But sometimes, taking a breath, taking a step back is really good for you as a founder. And oftentimes that time can unlock, other avenues which are even more beneficial or even more lucrative, possibly. That's point number three. So those would be my three principal pieces of advice.
And great piece of advice. And to your last point there, I often receive messages from my guests after these conversations saying that they've found something of that piece that you were talking about, that moment of pause in these conversations. And I hope you have too, because it's very few times as a startup founder where you're actually able to stop and talk with someone for 2 hours about what you've managed to achieve and have a chance to reflect on that. And so, hopefully this encourages other people to do the same. Maybe just sit down and have a conversation with a friend or a contemporary and just talk about the journey. Because I think that sort of reflexive practice can be incredibly beneficial. And I liked your first point, have faith, right?
It's very important. It's very important.
In whatever form that takes for you,
Excellent.
have faith.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And God doesn't like co-founders. All right, cool. Well, listen, man, it's been so great to speak to you again. And
what a podcast. This has been the best I've ever done. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yes, by some distance.
Well, good. Well, tell people to listen to it. I need more listeners. We've got a good amount, but we could always do with more. I'd definitely be interested in having you both on again at some point for round 2, and I'll have some more tricks up my sleeve.
Honestly, you need me. I'm here, man. Honestly, this is a joyful experience. This doesn't even work for me. This is brilliant.
Okay, well that's the goal. That is the goal. So I'm really glad to hear that. I just want people to just chill, have a good conversation, because it's my most favorite thing to do. So
I very much look forward to this episode. I'm going to send it to everyone.
Oh, cool. Awesome. I appreciate it. Well, look, man, have a great rest of your evening now. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of the week. And yeah, pop me over some details about any events going on that we could meet at. That'd be really awesome. Yeah.
1 second. So events, and ping me your address. I'll send you over a copy of the Quran. Just put it.
Why not? I'll put it right next to the Torah. but no, definitely. I mean,
the best book I ever read. Believe me, it'll blow your mind.
Well, look, I've got the Torah. My mum got me one because I asked her to get me one because I do want to read it. And I've not got around to it yet. And look, I want to absorb as much information that's out there in the world, regardless of where it's from. I don't believe on being ignorant to information just because I maybe don't believe in something. I think that's a very stupid way of approaching life. So yeah, by all means, I'll do that.
I'll be recording you and with regards to the introduction to Duccio. But yeah, absolute pleasure, Greg. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. All right, take care. Speak soon. Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye.
Thank you for watching and/or listening. Please like, subscribe and join the conversation in the comments below.